Hi, I'm Jasmine. I walked into my brother's housewarming party carrying homemade appetizers, only to find him telling his finance buddies that his sister plays pretend businesswoman with her little craft hobby. His wife Natalie just laughed along. Then her boss, the CEO of Meridian Industries, turned to me and said, "Actually, we've been looking everywhere for our new business partner. Jasmine, isn't it?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ever been the family member everyone writes off, only to discover you're the one they should have been paying attention to all along? Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from, and who's the person in your family that never believed in your dreams. I pulled into the circular driveway of Trevor and Natalie's new house in Willowbrook Heights at exactly 7:30. The sound of my old Honda Civic's engine sputtering against the backdrop of luxury SUVs and sleek sedans. The house loomed ahead like something out of a magazine, all glass and sharp angles, the kind of modern masterpiece that screamed success to anyone driving by. I'd spent 3 hours that afternoon preparing spinach and feta phyllo cups, the recipe I'd perfected after months of catering small events around Riverside. My hands still smelled faintly of fresh herbs, and I'd changed my outfit twice, settling on a simple black dress that I hoped looked professional enough for Trevor's crowd. The invitation had been casual, just a little gathering to show off the new place, Natalie had texted. But I knew better. Everything Trevor did was calculated, designed to showcase his latest achievement. The house was just another trophy, like the promotion to senior financial advisor at Clearwater Capital or the European honeymoon photos he'd plastered all over social media. I grabbed the warming tray from my passenger seat and made my way up the stone pathway, past perfectly manicured landscaping that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see clusters of people in expensive suits and cocktail dresses, wine glasses catching the light from a chandelier that belonged in a hotel lobby. The front door was already ajar, typical Trevor, always wanting to appear effortlessly welcoming. I slipped inside, the sound of my heels muffled by plush carpeting that felt like walking on clouds. The foyer opened into a great room with soaring ceilings and abstract art that looked like it came with price tags I didn't want to think about. "Jasmine! There she is!" Trevor's voice boomed across the room, and I turned to see him approaching with a group of men in expensive suits, all holding crystal tumblers of what looked like top-shelf whiskey. His face was flushed with the kind of confidence that came from showing off, and I braced myself for whatever was coming next. "Gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to my little sister." He threw an arm around me with the casual possessiveness that had defined our relationship since childhood. "Jasmine here is our family's entrepreneur." The way he said it with air quotes and a knowing smirk made my stomach clench. This was Trevor at his worst, the big brother who had spent our entire lives making sure everyone knew he was the successful one, the important one, the one worth paying attention to. "Actually," I said quietly, "I run a full-service event planning and catering company. We've handled everything from corporate launches to—" Right, Trevor interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "She plays pretend businesswoman with her little craft hobby. Very dedicated to the whole thing, aren't you, Jazz?" More laughter from his audience. I caught sight of Natalie across the room, deep in conversation with an older woman I didn't recognize. She glanced over and gave me a look that might have been sympathy or amusement. With Natalie, it was impossible to tell. "The thing is," Trevor continued, warming up to his topic, "some people are born to build empires, and others are born to, well, let's just say Jazz has always been more of a dreamer than a doer. But hey, someone's got to make the appetizers for the real business deals, right?" He squeezed my shoulder, and I could smell the expensive whiskey on his breath. This was vintage Trevor, cutting me down while pretending to be affectionate, making sure his audience understood exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. I was about to excuse myself when I noticed the older woman Natalie had been talking to making her way toward our group.
She was perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and the kind of confidence that filled a room without effort. Her dress was understated but clearly expensive, and she moved through the crowd like someone accustomed to being the most important person present. "Trevor," she said warmly, extending a manicured hand. "Congratulations on the beautiful home. Natalie's been giving you the full tour." Mrs. Pemberton! Trevor's entire demeanor shifted, the cocky older brother replaced by the eager-to-impress employee. "Thank you so much for coming. This is such an honor." Mrs. Pemberton. Even I recognized the name. Lydia Pemberton, CEO of Meridian Industries, one of the largest event management and corporate consulting firms on the East Coast. Natalie had mentioned her boss would be attending, but I hadn't expected someone of this caliber. And this must be the sister I've been hearing about. Jasmine, isn't it? Trevor looked confused, clearly not expecting his boss to know anything about me. "Oh, yes, this is Jazz. She dabbles in... Actually, we've been looking everywhere for our new business partner." The room seemed to pause. Trevor's confident smile faltered, and I felt every eye in the immediate vicinity turn toward us. Mrs. Pemberton reached into her purse and withdrew an elegant business card and pressed it into my hand. "I've been following your work for months, Jasmine. The Hartwell wedding last spring, the Riverside Chamber of Commerce Gala, absolutely exquisite. We've been trying to figure out how to approach you about a partnership opportunity." I stared at the card, my mind reeling. Meridian Industries wanted to partner with me? The little craft hobby that Trevor had been mocking for the past 10 minutes was apparently impressive enough to catch the attention of one of the biggest names in the industry. I had no idea you even knew about my company," I managed to say. Mrs. Pemberton smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. "My dear, in this business, word travels fast about real talent. We've had 3 different clients specifically request your services, but you've been booked solid. That's when we knew we needed to make this conversation happen." Trevor stood frozen, his whiskey glass halfway to his lips, watching his narrative collapse in real time. The men who'd been laughing at his jokes about my little hobby were now looking at me with new interest, calculating expressions replacing their earlier dismissal. "But this is perfect timing," Mrs. Pemberton continued, glancing around the beautiful house. "What better place to discuss expanding your operation than at a celebration of success?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The silence that followed Mrs. Pemberton's words stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. I could feel Trevor's eyes boring into me, his expression shifting from confusion to something darker. The group of finance professionals who'd been laughing at his jokes about my little hobby were now standing awkwardly, their crystal tumblers frozen halfway to their lips. Partnership. Trevor's voice cracked slightly on the word, and he cleared his throat, forcing his practiced smile back into place. That's wonderful, Jazz. Really, I always knew you had potential." But I knew that tone. It was the same one he'd used when I'd gotten accepted to State University on a scholarship while he'd had to settle for community college. The same tone when I'd bought my first car with money I had saved from 3 part-time jobs while he was still borrowing Dad's sedan. Trevor had perfected the art of sounding supportive while making sure everyone understood it was somehow his accomplishment too. Mrs. Pemberton seemed to read the room with the precision of someone who'd navigated corporate politics for decades. "Well, we should definitely continue this conversation in a more appropriate setting," she said smoothly, pressing another card into my hand. "Jasmine, please call my assistant tomorrow. We have a proposition that I think will interest you greatly." As she moved away to rejoin other conversations, Trevor's mask slipped completely. "What the hell was that about?" he hissed, grabbing my elbow and steering me toward a corner of the room, away from his colleagues. "I honestly have no idea," I said, which was mostly true. While I'd been proud of the events I'd managed for the past 2 years, I'd never imagined they'd caught the attention of someone like Lydia Pemberton.
Don't play dumb, Jazz. You had to have known she'd be here. Did you orchestrate this whole thing? The accusation stung, partly because it was so typical of Trevor to assume I was scheming rather than simply talented. I didn't even know who she was until Natalie introduced her. Trevor's jaw tightened. This was the brother I remembered from childhood, the one who'd convinced our parents I was lying about making honor roll because Jazz isn't that smart, the one who'd told his friends I was adopted when I had started getting better grades than him in high school. "Look, whatever this is, don't let it go to your head," he said, his voice low but sharp. "These corporate types, they'll promise you the moon and then disappear when reality hits. You're not built for that world, Jazz. You're better off sticking to what you know." What I knew. As if catering small events and coordinating weddings was some quaint little hobby I'd stumbled into, rather than a business I'd built from nothing. As if the 12-hour days, the endless phone calls, the careful budget management, and the constant networking weren't real work. I thought about the Hartwell wedding Mrs. Pemberton had mentioned. 3 months of planning, coordinating with 7 different vendors, managing a guest list of 300, and executing a flawless outdoor ceremony despite a surprise thunderstorm that morning. The bride had cried tears of relief when everything went perfectly, and the photos had been featured in 2 different wedding magazines. Or the Riverside Chamber of Commerce Gala, where I'd transformed a bland hotel ballroom into an elegant networking event that had raised $50,000 more than their previous year. The chamber president had personally thanked me and recommended my services to 3 other organizations. But to Trevor, it was all just playing pretend. "I should get going," I said, not trusting myself to say more without causing a scene at his housewarming party. "Come on, don't be like that," Trevor said, but his tone suggested he was relieved I wasn't planning to stick around and potentially embarrass him further. "We're family. I'm just looking out for you." Looking out for me. That was rich, coming from the brother who'd forgotten to invite me to his engagement party and had made sure I found out about it through our mother's Facebook photos. The same brother who'd never once asked about my business or offered to help promote it, despite working in finance and knowing dozens of people who regularly hosted corporate events. I made my way back through the crowd, collecting my warming tray from the kitchen. The phyllo cups had barely been touched. Of course, the catered spread was more appealing to this crowd. As I packed up, I caught sight of Mrs. Pemberton across the room, deep in conversation with 2 other well-dressed women. She glanced my way and gave me a subtle nod that felt like a promise. The drive home to my apartment in Riverside took 20 minutes, giving me time to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "How was Trevor's party? Did you meet anyone interesting?" Mom, who had spent years asking when I was going to settle down and get a real job instead of playing around with party planning. Mom, who'd proudly displayed Trevor's finance degree on the refrigerator for 6 months while barely mentioning my business license. Mom, who still introduced me as our Jasmine, she does events, and the same tone she might use to say she collects stamps. I pulled into my apartment complex, a modest 3-story building that was clean, but definitely not luxury. My unit was on the 2nd floor, a 1-bedroom that I'd slowly furnished with pieces I'd found at estate sales and refinished myself. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Paid for with money I'd earned, building something from scratch. Inside, I kicked off my heels and looked at the 2 business cards Mrs. Pemberton had given me. Meridian Industries. I'd researched them before, dreaming about the kinds of events they managed. Product launches for Fortune 500 companies, charity galas that raised millions, corporate retreats at 5-star resorts. They were everything I aspired to become. My laptop sat open on the small dining table that doubled as my desk, surrounded by vendor contracts and event timelines for 3 different weddings I had coming up. This was my life. Organized chaos, constant planning, and the satisfaction of turning other people's dreams into reality. I opened a new browser tab and searched for recent Meridian Industries events. The photos that came up were stunning, elegant affairs that looked like they belonged in magazines.
And according to Mrs. Pemberton, they wanted to partner with me. Little old me, with my craft hobby and my quaint little business. My phone rang, startling me out of my research. Natalie's name appeared on the screen, which was unusual. We rarely talked unless Trevor was involved. "Hey, Jasmine." Her voice was careful, measured. "I just wanted to call and, well, I wanted to apologize for how Trevor acted tonight." "You don't need to apologize for your husband," I said, though I appreciated the gesture. "Actually, I think I do. He was completely out of line, and honestly," she paused, and I heard her take a deep breath. "I've been following your work, too. The photos from the Hartwell wedding were incredible, and when Mrs. Pemberton mentioned she was interested in meeting you, I may have encouraged her to come tonight." I sat up straighter. "You what?"
I work for her, Jazz. I know what she's looking for, and I've seen what you can do. Trevor doesn't understand, but I do. You're not playing pretend businesswoman. You are a businesswoman. A damn good one. It was the first genuinely supportive thing anyone in my family had said about my work in years. I felt tears prick at my eyes. Unexpected and overwhelming. "Thank you," I managed to say. "Just call her tomorrow, okay? And don't let Trevor's insecurity hold you back. Some of us actually see what you've accomplished." After she hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, looking around at my modest but hard-earned space. Tomorrow, everything might change. Tonight, I was still the little sister with the cute hobby. But Mrs. Pemberton's cards sat on my table like promises, and for the first time in years, I felt like someone finally saw who I really was. The only question was whether I was ready to step into that bigger version of myself, and whether Trevor would be able to handle it when I did. I called Mrs. Pemberton's office at exactly 9 a.m. the next morning, my hands slightly trembling as I dialed the number on her elegant business card. Her assistant, a woman with a crisp British accent named Catherine, scheduled me for a meeting that very afternoon at Meridian's headquarters in downtown Ashford. The Meridian Industries building was a gleaming tower of glass and steel that dominated the city skyline. As I rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, I caught my reflection in the polished metal doors and straightened my blazer, my best one, purchased specifically for client meetings, though it suddenly felt inadequate for this level of corporate sophistication. Mrs. Pemberton's corner office was a masterpiece of understated luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and the furniture was that expensive kind of modern that looked deceptively simple but probably cost more than my car. She gestured for me to sit in a leather chair that was more comfortable than my entire living room set. "Jasmine, thank you for coming so quickly. I hope I didn't put you in an awkward position last night." "Not at all," I lied smoothly. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious about this partnership opportunity you mentioned." Mrs. Pemberton smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she knew far more than she was letting on. "Before we discuss that, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. How much do you know about your brother's work at Clearwater Capital?" The question caught me off guard. He's a senior financial advisor. He manages investment portfolios for high-net-worth clients. Why?" She leaned back in her chair, studying me with those sharp eyes that probably dissected countless business deals. "And has he ever mentioned working with event planning companies, corporate entertainment budgets, company celebration expenditures?" "Not specifically, no. Trevor we don't discuss our work much." That was putting it mildly. Trevor acted like my business didn't exist unless he was mocking it. Mrs. Pemberton opened a tablet on her desk and turned it toward me. On the screen was a spreadsheet, columns of numbers, dates, and company names that made my head spin. But one name jumped out at me immediately: Hartwell Industries. "This is interesting," she said, pointing to a line item. "It appears your brother's firm has been managing the investment portfolio for Hartwell Industries for the past 3 years, including their corporate event budgets." I stared at the screen, my mind racing.
The Hartwell wedding, the one Mrs. Pemberton had praised just last night, hadn't just been any wedding. It was the daughter of James Hartwell, the CEO of Hartwell Industries, a client of Trevor's firm. I don't understand, I said slowly. 3 months ago, Clearwater Capital received a rather unusual request from Hartwell Industries. They needed an event planner for a high-profile wedding, something elegant but not ostentatious, something that would reflect well on the family's reputation. The usual suspects, the big-name planning firms, were either booked or felt too commercial for what they wanted. Mrs. Pemberton swiped to another document, and I saw my own company name, Riverside Events by Jasmine. Below it was a detailed analysis. Revenue projections, client satisfaction scores, portfolio reviews. Someone at Clearwater Capital recommended you specifically, told the Hartwell family that you were discreet, talented, and could deliver exactly the kind of understated elegance they were looking for. They provided detailed information about your previous work, your approach, your aesthetic sensibility. My mouth dried. Trevor? That's what we initially assumed. After all, he was their primary account manager. But then something interesting happened. She swiped again, revealing what looked like internal emails. After the wedding was such a tremendous success, the Hartwell family wanted to thank whoever had made the recommendation. They asked specifically to meet with the person who had suggested you. I had a sinking feeling I knew where this was going.
The words hit me like a physical blow. Even when my success was directly benefiting his clients, Trevor couldn't bring himself to acknowledge it. Worse, he'd actively distanced himself from it. But here's where it gets interesting, Mrs. Pemberton continued. We started investigating because this kind of mysterious recommendation intrigued us. What we found was fascinating. She pulled up another screen, this one showing a series of emails and documents that made my breath catch. They were all from Clearwater Capital's system, but the sender wasn't Trevor. It was Natalie. Your sister-in-law has been quietly building your reputation within the corporate community for over a year. She's been the one recommending your services, providing client references, and even negotiating some of your contracts behind the scenes. She's essentially been acting as your unofficial marketing director. I stared at the evidence on the screen, my mind reeling. Email after email from Natalie's corporate account, each one professionally crafted to highlight my abilities and past successes. Recommendations sent to potential clients, detailed portfolios of my work shared with other companies. She even created a presentation deck about my services that looked more professional than anything I could have made myself. But why? I managed to ask. Mrs. Pemberton's expression softened slightly. According to what we've pieced together, your sister-in-law has been watching your career development with considerable interest. She's been documenting your growth, your successes, your potential, and she's been systematically building bridges between your small operation and clients who could benefit from your services. Trevor doesn't know? From what we can tell, absolutely not. And neither did you, apparently. Natalie has been operating in complete secrecy, using her position at Meridian to identify opportunities and her husband's firm's client base to create connections. I thought back to all the mysterious referrals I'd received over the past year, clients who somehow knew exactly what I could offer, who came to me with detailed requests that seemed tailored to my specific skills. I'd attributed it to word-of-mouth recommendations, but now I realized there had been a deliberate strategy behind it all. The Chamber of Commerce Gala. Was that also Natalie's work? She sits on their board and specifically recommended you for that event. She even provided them with a detailed analysis of why your approach would be more effective than the larger firms they usually hire. Mrs. Pemberton leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. Jasmine, what I'm about to tell you might change how you see your recent success, and I want you to understand that it doesn't diminish your accomplishments in any way. You earned every bit of praise you've received, but you should know that you've had a guardian angel working behind the scenes.
She pulled up one final document, a comprehensive business plan with my name at the top. It outlined expansion strategies, partnership opportunities, market analysis, and financial projections that were far more sophisticated than anything I had ever created. This is Natalie's vision for your company's future. She's been developing this for months, identifying the exact path that could take you from a small local operation to a major player in the corporate events industry. And she's been positioning you perfectly to make that transition. I sat back in the leather chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I was learning. All this time while Trevor had been dismissing and undermining me, his own wife had been secretly orchestrating my career advancement. She had been playing a long game that I didn't even know existed. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Mrs. Pemberton smiled that knowing smile again. "Because, my dear, Natalie works for me. She's one of our most valuable strategic consultants, and this entire operation has been conducted with my full knowledge and approval. We've been testing you, Jasmine. Every event, every client, every challenge, it's all been part of an elaborate evaluation process." Testing me? We needed to see how you'd handle pressure, how you'd manage growth, how you'd maintain quality while scaling up. We needed to know if you were just a talented small business owner or if you had the potential to be something much bigger. She stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city spread below us. What we discovered exceeded our expectations. You're not just talented, you're instinctive, adaptable, and you maintain your integrity even under pressure. You're exactly what we've been looking for. For what? Mrs. Pemberton turned back to me, and I saw something in her expression that I'd never seen directed at me before. Complete professional respect. "We want to offer you a full partnership in Meridian Industries, not as an employee, not as a contractor, but as an equal partner with your own division and complete creative control. We want to back your expansion with our resources, our network, and our reputation." I felt like I was in a dream. This morning I was Jasmine with the cute hobby. Now I was being offered a partnership in one of the most prestigious companies in the industry. Your brother has no idea what he's been dismissing. And frankly, after seeing how he's treated both you and your accomplishments, I'm rather looking forward to his reaction when he finds out who his little sister really is.
I walked out of Meridian Industries with a signed letter of intent in my purse and my head spinning from the magnitude of what had just happened. Partnership. Full partnership in one of the most prestigious event management companies on the East Coast. Mrs. Pemberton had given me 72 hours to review the formal contract, but we both knew I'd already made my decision the moment she'd offered it. The drive back to Riverside felt surreal, like I was floating between two different versions of my life. This morning, I'd been small business Jasmine, worried about making rent and hoping my next client would pay on time. Now, I was potentially Jasmine Pemberton Reynolds, partner at Meridian Industries, with a corner office and a six-figure salary that would make Trevor's finance job look like a summer internship. But first, I needed to understand exactly what Natalie had been doing behind the scenes. Mrs. Pemberton had given me access to a secure portal where I could review all the documentation of Natalie's year-long campaign to build my career. I pulled into a coffee shop near my apartment, ordered the largest latte they had, and opened my laptop. The portal required a complex password that Mrs. Pemberton had written on the back of her business card. When it opened, I found myself staring at what could only be described as a masterclass in strategic career development. Natalie had created an entire digital filing system dedicated to my professional advancement, complete with folders labeled client acquisition, brand development, market positioning, and partnership preparation. The client acquisition folder contained detailed profiles of every referral I'd received over the past 14 months. Each entry included not just contact information, but comprehensive notes about the client's needs, budget expectations, and personal preferences. Natalie had researched each potential client thoroughly, identifying exactly why my services would appeal to them, and crafting personalized recommendation pitches that highlighted my specific strengths. The Hartwell Industries entry was particularly detailed.
Natalie had noted that James Hartwell's previous daughter had eloped rather than have a large wedding, creating family tension around the concept of elaborate celebrations. His younger daughter, Miranda, wanted something elegant, but not ostentatious. Exactly the kind of understated sophistication that had become my signature. Natalie had even included a psychological profile noting that Hartwell valued authenticity over flashiness, making me a perfect fit for their family's needs. But it was the brand development folder that truly took my breath away. Natalie had created a complete marketing strategy for my business, including a professional website design, social media templates, and a comprehensive brand guide that defined my aesthetic and positioning in the market. She'd identified my unique selling proposition as intimate luxury, high-end service with personal attention that the bigger firms couldn't match. Most shocking of all, she'd been implementing this strategy without my knowledge. The professional photos on my website that I had assumed were taken by a friend's photographer, Natalie had hired and paid for a professional branding shoot, telling me it was a wedding gift when Trevor and I had reconciled after one of our arguments. The polished client testimonials that had started appearing on my social media, Natalie had been soliciting and editing them, making sure they highlighted exactly the qualities that would appeal to corporate clients. The market positioning folder contained competitive analyses of every major event planning firm in the region, complete with pricing structures, service offerings, and client satisfaction ratings. Natalie had identified exactly where gaps existed in the market. High-end clients who wanted personalized service but couldn't get attention from the major firms, and smaller companies that needed sophisticated events but couldn't afford the premium agencies. She'd positioned me perfectly to fill that gap, and the documentation proved it was working. Over the past year, my average contract value had increased by 340%. My client retention rate was 95%, and my referral rate was higher than firms with 10 times my marketing budget. But the partnership preparation folder was the most stunning of all. It contained a comprehensive business plan for integrating my operation into a larger firm, complete with financial projections, staffing recommendations, and growth strategies that extended 5 years into the future. Natalie had anticipated this exact scenario and had been preparing me systematically. She'd even included detailed analyses of my personal strengths and areas for development. Professional communication skills, excellent. Creative vision, exceptional. Financial management, solid, but could use corporate-level sophistication. Team leadership, demonstrated potential, but limited experience with large-scale operations. Reading her assessments felt like looking at myself through the eyes of someone who understood my potential better than I did. Natalie had seen exactly who I could become and had been quietly building the foundation to get me there. My phone buzzed with a text from Trevor. "Hey, heard from Natalie you had some big meeting today. Everything okay?" I stared at the message, wondering how to even begin explaining what I'd discovered. Trevor had no idea that his wife had been orchestrating my success while he'd been actively undermining it. He couldn't conceive that the little craft hobby he'd been mocking was about to become a major business partnership that would put my earning potential well beyond his own. Instead of responding to Trevor, I called Natalie directly. She answered on the second ring, her voice carefully neutral in the way it was always when she might be overheard at the office.
Jasmine, how did your meeting go? I think you know exactly how it went, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The question is, why didn't you tell me what you were doing? A long pause, then quietly, can we meet somewhere private? There's more you need to know. An hour later, we sat in a small restaurant in downtown Ashford, far enough from both our usual haunts that we wouldn't encounter anyone from Trevor's social circle. Natalie had changed out of her corporate attire into jeans and a sweater, looking more like the woman I'd known before she'd married my brother and entered his world of status symbols and appearances. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked without preamble. Natalie stirred her coffee slowly, organizing her thoughts. "Since the day I started working at Meridian, about 18 months ago. Mrs. Pemberton was talking about expanding into the mid-tier market, high-quality service for clients who weren't quite Fortune 500 level, but wanted more than the standard wedding planner approach. I immediately thought of you. But you never said anything. Because I knew you'd refuse help from Trevor's wife. And honestly,
She looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, respect mixed with something that might have been regret. I knew Trevor would sabotage it if he found out. He's always been threatened by your success, even when it was small. If he'd known what we were really building, he would have found a way to undermine it. The truth of that statement settled between us like an uncomfortable weight. Trevor's pattern of minimizing my achievements wasn't just sibling rivalry. It was something deeper and more problematic. The partnership offer, I said. That was always the end goal. Natalie nodded. Mrs. Pemberton has been looking for the right person to develop a new division focused on emerging markets. Someone with proven talent, but without the ego and overhead of the established firms. Someone hungry enough to take risks, but professional enough to maintain Meridian's reputation. And you thought that was me? I knew that was you. I've watched you handle impossible clients, work miracles with tiny budgets, and maintain your integrity even when vendors tried to take advantage of you. You have something that can't be taught. You genuinely care about making people's events perfect, not just profitable. She leaned forward, her expression becoming more intense. But I also knew you'd never believe in your own potential unless someone showed you proof. So I spent a year collecting that proof. One client at a time. What happens now? I asked. Natalie's smile was the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her in months. Now you become everything I always knew you could be. And Trevor, she paused, her smile becoming slightly sharper, Trevor finds out that his little sister isn't so little anymore. He's going to lose his mind when he finds out about the partnership. Probably, but here's the thing, Jasmine. You don't need his approval anymore. You never did, but now you have the evidence to prove it. She reached into her purse and pulled out a tablet, sliding it across the table to me. On the screen was an email draft, addressed to Trevor with the subject line, "About Jasmine's career." "I've been working on this for weeks," Natalie said. "A complete summary of everything I've done to support your business, every client I've connected you with, every opportunity I've created, documentation of every time Trevor dismissed or undermined your work, and evidence of how much money his attitude has potentially cost his own firm." I scrolled through the email, my eyes widening as I read. Natalie had documented everything. Every snide comment Trevor had made about my hobby, every client opportunity he failed to recognize, every instance where his inability to see my potential had worked against his own professional interests. The final paragraph was particularly pointed. "I've watched you dismiss Jasmine's talents for years, while I've been quietly helping her build exactly the kind of success you claim to value. She's about to become a partner in a firm that generates more annual revenue than your entire office. I thought you should know, since you'll probably be reading about it in the business section soon." "You're really going to send this?" I asked. Natalie's expression was calm, but there was steel underneath. "After you sign the partnership agreement, yes. Trevor needs to understand that his attitude has consequences, and frankly, I'm tired of pretending his behavior is acceptable." I looked at the draft email, then at Natalie, then back at my phone where Trevor's text still waited for a response. In 72 hours, my entire life would change. The question was whether I was ready to let everyone else's expectations change along with it. "There's one more thing," Natalie said quietly. "Mrs. Pemberton wants to announce the partnership at the Regional Business Awards Gala next week. It's the biggest networking event of the year. Everyone who matters in the corporate world will be there." "Including Trevor's firm?" "Including Trevor's firm. Clearwater Capital is one of the sponsors. I believe they'll be presenting an award for Rising Entrepreneurs in Financial Services right before we announce your partnership and new position as Vice President of Strategic Development at Meridian Industries." The next 72 hours passed in a blur of contract reviews, strategic planning sessions, and the kind of professional preparation I'd never imagined I'd need. Mrs. Pemberton had assigned me a team of advisors, a lawyer to review the partnership agreement, a financial consultant to explain the equity structure, and a communications specialist to help prepare for the public announcement. The Meridian Industries partnership contract was unlike anything I'd ever seen. 23 pages of legal language that essentially boiled down to this: I would become a full partner with a 15% stake in the company, my own division focused on emerging markets, and complete creative control over my projects. In return, I would bring my existing client base, my operational knowledge, and my willingness to help expand Meridian's reach into the mid-tier market that had been underserved by the major firms. The financial projections were staggering. Conservative estimates put my first-year earnings at 3 times what I'd made in my best year running my own business. Aggressive projections, based on the growth trajectory Natalie had documented, suggested I could be earning more than Trevor within 18 months. But it was the strategic planning sessions that really opened my eyes to what I was stepping into. Mrs. Pemberton introduced me to the full Meridian team, 12 senior consultants, each specializing in different aspects of corporate event management. There was Richard, who handled Fortune 500 product launches, Amanda, who coordinated international corporate retreats, and David, who managed crisis communications events for companies dealing with public relations disasters. They welcomed me with the kind of professional respect I'd never experienced before. No condescending questions about whether I understood the scope of corporate work, no assumptions that I'd need extensive training to handle their level of clients. They treated me like an equal from the moment I walked into the conference room, because Mrs. Pemberton had already shown them the documentation of my capabilities. Your approach to the Hartwell wedding was textbook crisis management, Richard told me during our first strategy session. When that storm system moved in 6 hours before the ceremony, you had 3 contingency plans already in place. Most firms would have panicked or tried to postpone. The Chamber of Commerce Gala demonstrated sophisticated vendor coordination, Amanda added. You managed 14 different suppliers across 6 different service categories and brought the event in 8% under budget while exceeding every performance metric. That's corporate-level project management. David was reviewing my client retention statistics on his tablet. 95% retention rate over 18 months, with an average contract value increase of 340%. Those numbers would be impressive for a firm with 50 employees and unlimited marketing budget. It was surreal to hear my work discussed in these terms. For 2 years, I'd been thinking of myself as someone who planned parties and coordinated weddings. These people saw me as a strategic business developer who happened to specialize in events. The communication specialist, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, was particularly focused on the upcoming Regional Business Awards Gala. The announcement needs to be positioned perfectly, she explained, pulling up a detailed timeline on her laptop. We want to frame this as Meridian's strategic expansion, with you as the driving force behind our entry into the emerging market sector. She showed me the press release they drafted. Meridian Industries announces strategic partnership with rising entrepreneur Jasmine Rodriguez, bringing innovative approach to mid-tier corporate events market. The language was carefully crafted to emphasize my expertise while positioning the partnership as a natural evolution of both our companies. The timing is crucial, Patricia continued. Your brother's firm will be presenting their Rising Entrepreneurs Award at 8:30. We'll make our announcement at 8:45, right after the applause dies down. The juxtaposition will be memorable. Meanwhile, Natalie had been conducting her own preparation. She'd arranged for us to meet with her contacts at 3 other major corporations, potential clients who had been waiting for the right moment to transition from their current event planning firms. These weren't casual coffee meetings. These were formal business presentations where I would be pitching Meridian's expanded services to companies with 7-figure event budgets. The first meeting was with Goldstream Technologies, a rapidly growing software company that was planning to go public within a year. Their HR director, a woman named Lisa Chen, who looked barely older than me, had very specific requirements for their corporate events. We need someone who understands our culture, she explained as we sat in their sleek conference room. We're not trying to be stuffy and traditional, but we're also not a startup anymore. We need events that reflect our growth and professionalism without losing our innovative edge. I found myself slipping into consultant mode, asking detailed questions about their employee demographics, their client relationships, and their public image goals. Within 30 minutes, I was sketching out concepts for a product launch that would position them as cutting-edge but reliable, innovative but trustworthy. This is exactly what we've been looking for, Lisa said when I finished my presentation. The big firms keep trying to put us in a box. Either we're a tech startup that wants ping pong tables and beer taps, or we're a serious corporation that wants crystal and classical music. You understand that we can be both. The Goldstream contract alone would represent more revenue than my previous 6 months, and it was clear that this was just the beginning.
The second meeting was with Westfield Manufacturing, a family-owned company that was celebrating their 50th anniversary with a series of events throughout the year. The third-generation owner, James Westfield III, had very different concerns. "We've worked with the same event planning firm for 15 years, he told me bluntly. They do adequate work, but they don't understand our values. Every proposal feels like something they've done for 10 other companies. We want someone who will take the time to understand what makes Westfield special." This was exactly the kind of challenge I thrived on. I spent 2 hours interviewing James about the company's history, their family traditions, their relationships with their employees and community. By the end of the meeting, I had outlined an anniversary celebration series that would honor their past while positioning them for the future, incorporating elements that were uniquely meaningful to their company culture. "I haven't been this excited about a business partnership in years," James said as we shook hands. "You see us as we are, not as a generic corporate client." By Thursday evening, I had 3 major contracts pending, contingent on the Meridian partnership being finalized, and a calendar full of potential client meetings extending 2 months into the future. My phone was buzzing constantly with calls from other business owners who had heard through various networks that something interesting was happening with Jasmine Rodriguez and Meridian Industries. But the most important call came Thursday night, just as I was reviewing my presentation notes for the Regional Business Awards Gala. It was Mrs. Pemberton, and her voice carried an edge of excitement I hadn't heard before. "Jasmine, we need to talk. Something has come up that changes our timeline." "Changes it how?" "Trevor's firm has apparently been conducting their own investigation into your recent business growth. Someone there noticed the uptick in corporate referrals and started asking questions about how a small local business was suddenly attracting high-value clients." My stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that led them to discover some of the connections between your clients and their own customer base. Jasmine, they've figured out that several of your major contracts came through Clearwater Capital's network." I closed my eyes, trying to process the implications. How much do they know? Enough to be asking uncomfortable questions about potential conflicts of interest. Enough that Trevor is apparently planning to address the issue publicly at tomorrow night's gala. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Address it how?" Mrs. Pemberton's voice became very serious. "According to our sources, he's planning to use his presentation time to raise questions about nepotism and inappropriate use of client relationships. He's going to try to discredit your success by suggesting it was all based on insider access through his firm." "But that's not," I started to protest, then stopped. Because while it wasn't exactly true, it wasn't entirely false either. Natalie had used her access to information and networks through Clearwater Capital to create opportunities for me. The fact that she'd done it secretly and that Trevor had actively opposed it didn't change the basic fact that his firm's resources had played a role in my recent growth. "Can he prove anything?" I asked. "He doesn't need to prove anything," Mrs. Pemberton replied grimly. "He just needs to plant enough doubt to damage your reputation before you've had a chance to establish yourself as a Meridian partner. If he successfully frames your success as the result of insider dealing rather than talent and hard work, it could undermine everything we've built." I sat down heavily in my desk chair, staring at the partnership contract that had seemed like a golden opportunity just hours earlier. "So, what do we do?" "We accelerate everything. Instead of making a simple announcement tomorrow night, we're going to present a comprehensive case study of your qualifications and achievements. We're going to document every aspect of your success in a way that makes it impossible for anyone to question your capabilities." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the steel that had built her reputation in the corporate world. "And we're going to make sure that when Trevor tries to discredit you, he ends up discrediting himself instead. Natalie has been preparing for this possibility, and she has documentation that will turn his accusations back on him in ways he won't see coming." "What kind of documentation?" Mrs. Pemberton's smile was audible through the phone. "Let's just say that Trevor's treatment of your success and his failure to recognize opportunities that were right in front of him is going to become a case study in poor business judgment. Natalie has been very thorough in her record keeping. As I hung up the phone, I realized that tomorrow night's gala wouldn't just be the launch of my new career. It would be the final confrontation between the version of me that Trevor had always dismissed and the version of myself that I was finally ready to become. The question was whether I had the courage to stand up in front of the entire business community and claim the success that I'd earned, regardless of how I'd gotten the opportunities to prove myself. The Regional Business Awards Gala was held at the Grand Ashford Hotel, a sprawling conference center that had hosted every major business event in the city for the past 2 decades. As I walked through the marble lobby in my new navy blue dress, purchased specifically for this evening with Mrs. Pemberton's insistence that I dress the part, I felt like I was stepping into a different version of my life. The main ballroom buzzed with the kind of controlled energy that only came from putting 500 successful business professionals in the same room. I recognized faces from newspaper business sections, company websites, and the kind of LinkedIn profiles that made ordinary people feel inadequate. These or the decision makers, the deal closers, the people who shaped the economic landscape of the region. And somehow, I belonged here now. Mrs. Pemberton had arrived early to coordinate with the event organizers, but she'd positioned me at a table near the front with other Meridian partners and their spouses. The placement was strategic, visible enough to be noticed, close enough to the stage to make my entrance during the announcement seamless, but not so prominent as to attract attention before the right moment. Natalie sat 2 tables away, with Trevor and his colleagues from Clearwater Capital. She caught my eye across the room and gave me the slightest nod, a gesture that somehow conveyed both encouragement and warning. She looked elegant in a black cocktail dress that complemented Trevor's expensive suit, playing the role of the supportive corporate wife while secretly orchestrating the evening's most dramatic moment. Trevor himself seemed unusually animated, leaning in close to his table mates and gesturing frequently. From where I sat, I could see him checking his phone repeatedly and making notes on the program. Whatever he was planning for his presentation, he was clearly excited about it. The evening began with the usual corporate gala routine. Networking cocktails, a dinner that was designed more for presentation than flavor, and a series of awards that celebrated various business achievements throughout the year. I found myself relaxing slightly as the familiar rhythm of professional events took over. This was my world now, even if I was still getting used to occupying it. But my calm evaporated when the MC announced the next category, the Rising Entrepreneurs Award presented by Clearwater Capital and accepted by Senior Financial Advisor Trevor Rodriguez. Trevor stood and made his way to the podium with the confidence of someone who owned every room he entered. He looked polished, professional, and completely at ease under the bright stage lights, the kind of presence that had always made me feel small and uncertain in comparison. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom's sound system. "I'm honored to be here representing Clearwater Capital and presenting this award to the region's most promising emerging entrepreneurs." So far, so standard. But then his tone shifted slightly, becoming more conversational, more intimate. You know, entrepreneurship is fascinating to me, both professionally and personally. In my role at Clearwater, I get to watch businesses grow from small ideas into major success stories. I see the hard work, the dedication, the genuine innovation that drives real achievement. He paused, scanning the room with the practiced ease of someone comfortable commanding attention. But I also see the other side, the shortcuts people try to take, the way some individuals try to leverage relationships and insider access to create the appearance of success without doing the actual work required to earn it. A subtle shift in the room's energy. Conversations at nearby tables quieted slightly. This wasn't the standard corporate award presentation anymore. Recently, I've become aware of a situation that I think perfectly illustrates this problem. Someone in my own extended network has been using connections to my firm, connections they gained through family relationships, to access client information and create business opportunities that they never could have generated on their own merit.
My heart began pounding so hard I was certain the people at my table could hear it. Trevor was looking directly at me now, his expression a mixture of righteous indignation and practiced sincerity. This person has built what appears to be a successful business, but when you look closely at the client list, you discover that every major contract came through insider access to corporate information. Information they obtained through family connections, not through their own networking or reputation. Murmurs began rippling through the audience. I could feel eyes turning toward me, though most of the room probably didn't yet understand who Trevor was talking about, but they would soon enough. Now, I'm not saying this person lacks talent, Trevor continued, his voice taking on a tone of patronizing concern. I'm sure they work very hard at what they do, but there's a difference between earning success and having success handed to you through nepotism and insider dealing. He paused for effect, letting the implications settle over the room. As business professionals, we have an obligation to call out these practices when we see them, because every unearned opportunity takes away from someone who might have earned it legitimately. Every shortcut undermines the integrity of our entire business community. The room was completely silent now except for the soft hum of the air conditioning system. Trevor had successfully captured everyone's attention and was building towards what was clearly intended to be a devastating revelation.
So, before we celebrate tonight's legitimate achievements, I think it's important that we acknowledge the difference between real entrepreneurial success and manufactured success that depends on insider access and family connections. He looked directly at me again, and I saw something in his expression that went beyond professional disapproval. This was personal satisfaction. This was the brother who'd spent our entire lives ensuring that everyone understood I was the lesser sibling, finally getting the chance to prove it on the biggest possible stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I present this award to entrepreneurs who have built their success through genuine innovation, hard work, and ethical business practices. People who understand that real achievement can't be purchased through family connections or insider information. The applause that followed was uncertain, scattered. The audience could sense that something significant had just happened, but they weren't sure what or how they should respond to it. Trevor had successfully planted doubt and suspicion without actually naming names, leaving everyone to draw their own conclusions. As Trevor returned to his table, I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on me, some curious, some speculative, some already forming judgments based on his carefully crafted implications. The whispered conversations that began immediately told me that people were connecting the dots, figuring out that Trevor's target was his own sister sitting 3 tables away. Mrs. Pemberton, who had been watching from a table near the back of the room, began making her way toward the podium. But before she could reach the podium, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Natalie. "Now you know why I documented everything. Check your email. Showtime." With trembling fingers, I opened my email app. The most recent message was from Natalie, sent just moments ago, with the subject line, "For immediate release." Attached was a document that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a comprehensive analysis of Trevor's professional performance over the past 2 years, complete with client satisfaction ratings, missed opportunities, and revenue statistics. But more damaging than the numbers was the detailed documentation of his attitude toward potential business partnerships and his failure to recognize profitable opportunities that were right in front of him. The document included transcripts of conversations where Trevor had dismissed potential clients as not worth the effort, email chains where he'd actively discouraged colleagues from pursuing partnerships with smaller firms, and performance reviews that noted his tendency to undervalue emerging market opportunities. Most devastating of all was a section titled "Lost Revenue Due to Professional Bias," which calculated exactly how much money Clearwater Capital had missed out on because of Trevor's inability to recognize the value of the client relationships I'd been building. The number was substantial enough to make his supervisors question his judgment and his commitment to the firm's growth. But the final section was what truly took my breath away.
It was a detailed breakdown of every client referral I'd received, showing that while the initial introductions had come through Natalie's networking, every single contract renewal and expansion had been based entirely on my performance and results. The document proved conclusively that whatever advantages I might have had in getting my foot in the door, my success had been earned through competence and professionalism. As I finished reading, Mrs. Pemberton reached the podium. The room quieted again, sensing that the evening's drama wasn't over yet. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Lydia Pemberton, CEO of Meridian Industries, and I need to address some concerns that have just been raised about business ethics and professional integrity." The silence in the room was now complete. Even the service staff had stopped moving, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "Mr. Rodriguez has raised important questions about nepotism and insider dealing in our business community. These are serious allegations that deserve a serious response." She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the room before settling on Trevor's table, which is why I'm grateful for this opportunity to present some facts that I believe will clarify exactly what kind of business practices we should be celebrating tonight. Mrs. Pemberton stepped forward to the podium with the measured confidence of someone who had prepared for this exact moment. Behind her, a large screen descended from the ceiling, the kind of professional presentation setup that transformed corporate events into boardroom-level strategic discussions. Before we discuss Ms. Rodriguez's qualifications, Mrs. Pemberton began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "I think it's important that we examine the broader context of how business relationships actually develop in our industry." The first slide appeared on the screen, a timeline labeled Jasmine Rodriguez Professional Development 2022 to 2024. It showed my business growth over the past 2 years, with key milestones marked in clean, corporate formatting that made my achievements look substantial and strategic rather than accidental. Ms. Rodriguez began her event planning business 26 months ago with a single wedding contract worth $3,200. Over the following 2 years, through what Mr. Rodriguez has characterized as insider access, she has built a client base with an annual revenue of $340,000 and a client satisfaction rating of 98.7%.
Murmurs rippled through the audience. These weren't the numbers of someone playing around with a hobby. These were the metrics of a serious business operation. The next slide showed client testimonials, but not the usual generic praise. These were detailed reviews from CEOs and corporate decision-makers discussing specific aspects of my work that had impressed them: strategic thinking, crisis management, budget optimization, vendor coordination, the language of serious business evaluation. But let's examine Mr. Rodriguez's specific allegations about insider dealing and nepotism, Mrs. Pemberton continued, advancing to a new section of slides, because I think the documentation tells a rather different story. The screen now displayed a comprehensive analysis of my client acquisition patterns. Each major contract was broken down by source: referrals, repeat business, competitive bidding, and direct inquiries. The data showed that while my initial clients had come through networking connections, more than 70% of my current business was either repeat customers or referrals from satisfied clients. What we see here is not someone leveraging insider access, but someone building a reputation through performance. The initial connections may have provided opportunities, but the sustained success came through demonstrated competence. Mrs. Pemberton clicked to the next slide, and I saw Trevor's expression change as he realized what was being displayed. It was a detailed analysis of Clearwater Capital's client event management, showing exactly how much money their clients had spent on corporate events over the past 2 years, and which firms had been hired for those events. "This is particularly interesting," Mrs. Pemberton said, her tone becoming more pointed, "because while Mr. Rodriguez has accused his sister of gaining unfair advantages through family connections, the data shows that Clearwater Capital has actually missed substantial opportunities by failing to recognize the value of her services." The numbers were damning. Client after client had hired other firms for events, paying premium prices for services that I could have provided at better value with superior results. Trevor's own clients had repeatedly gone outside his network because he'd never thought to mention that his sister ran exactly the kind of business they needed. In fact, Mrs. Pemberton continued, our analysis suggests that Mr. Rodriguez's failure to recognize these opportunities has cost his firm approximately $180,000 in potential commissions over the past 18 months. I watched Trevor's face drained of color as the full implications hit him. Not only had he missed out on supporting my success, but his dismissive attitude had literally cost his firm money. His supervisors and colleagues were sitting right there, seeing documentation of revenue that could have been theirs if Trevor had been paying attention. But Mrs. Pemberton wasn't finished. The next slide showed a comparison chart that made my breath catch. It was my business metrics compared to other event planning firms in the region, established companies with years of history and substantial marketing budgets. Ms. Rodriguez's client retention rate is 95%, compared to an industry average of 73%. Her average project comes in 12% under budget while exceeding performance expectations. Her referral rate is 340% higher than comparable firms. These are not the statistics of someone whose success depends on insider access. These are the numbers of someone who has fundamentally mastered her profession. The room was completely silent now. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. Mrs. Pemberton advanced to a new section of slides, and I realized we were entering territory that even I hadn't fully understood. But there's another aspect of this story that I think deserves attention, she said, her voice taking on the edge that had built her reputation as one of the region's most formidable business leaders. The question of professional judgment and missed opportunities. The new slides showed a detailed breakdown of Trevor's professional performance at Clearwater Capital. Client satisfaction scores, revenue generation, new business development, all compared to his colleagues and industry benchmarks. The picture that emerged was of someone who was competent but unexceptional, successful but not innovative. Mr. Rodriguez has built a solid career in financial services, Mrs. Pemberton acknowledged, but his inability to recognize emerging opportunities, particularly in the events and corporate services sector, has been noted by his supervisors as an area for improvement. She clicked to a new slide that made my heart stop. It was an internal Clearwater Capital performance review with Trevor's name at the top and his supervisor's comments clearly visible. The language was diplomatic but pointed. Needs to develop stronger networking instincts. Sometimes misses opportunities for client service expansion. Could benefit from broader understanding of adjacent business services. These are the performance evaluations of someone who has repeatedly failed to recognize the value of exactly the kind of business partnerships that Ms. Rodriguez has been building. In fact, there's evidence that Mr. Rodriguez has actively discouraged his colleagues from pursuing opportunities in the events and corporate services sector. The next slide showed email communications, messages where Trevor had dismissed potential partnerships with event planning firms as not worth the hassle, and had characterized the corporate events market as fluff that doesn't generate real revenue. Reading his own words projected for the entire business community to see, Trevor looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. But perhaps most revealing, continued Mrs. Pemberton, is this analysis of lost opportunities specifically related to family connections.
The screen now showed a detailed breakdown of every instance where Trevor could have facilitated business connections between his firm's clients and my services, along with calculations of the revenue that both companies could have generated from those partnerships. The numbers were staggering, not just the money I could have earned, but the commissions and client satisfaction improvements that Clearwater Capital had missed out on. Over the past 2 years, Mr. Rodriguez had direct knowledge of at least 12 instances where his sister's services would have been valuable to his clients. In 11 of those cases, he either failed to make the connection or actively discouraged it.
The cumulative impact of these missed opportunities represents approximately $420,000 in potential revenue for Clearwater Capital alone. I saw Trevor's supervisor leaning forward in his chair, making notes with the expression of someone who was planning difficult conversations for Monday morning. Other colleagues at his table were studying the slides with the kind of focused attention that suggested they were reconsidering their assessment of Trevor's business judgment. Mrs. Pemberton advanced to what was clearly her final section of slides. But there's one more aspect of this situation that I think deserves our attention: the question of integrity and professional ethics that Mr. Rodriguez raised in his presentation. The screen showed a comprehensive timeline of my business development, but this one included detailed documentation of every client interaction, every referral source, and every aspect of how my reputation had been built. It was the kind of thorough analysis that could only have been compiled by someone with access to extensive corporate intelligence resources. What this timeline reveals is not a pattern of insider dealing, but a textbook example of how professional success actually develops in our industry: initial opportunities through networking, sustained growth through performance, and reputation building through consistent delivery of superior results. She clicked to a slide that showed quotes from my clients, not generic testimonials, but specific comments about my professional ethics, my transparency in business dealings, and my commitment to delivering value rather than simply charging premium prices. Ms. Rodriguez has built her success by consistently exceeding client expectations while maintaining the highest ethical standards. She has never used confidential information, never leveraged relationships inappropriately, and never compromised her integrity for short-term gains. The final slide appeared, and I realized Mrs. Pemberton had saved the most devastating revelation for last. It was a detailed analysis of Trevor's own business practices, showing instances where he had used family connections, personal relationships, and informal access to information to benefit his clients and build his career. The irony, of course, is that Mr. Rodriguez has built his own career using exactly the kind of relationship leverage that he's now criticizing. The difference is that his sister has used her opportunities to build something sustainable and valuable, while his approach has been focused on maintaining the status quo. Mrs. Pemberton stepped back from the podium, letting the full weight of her presentation settle over the room. The silence that followed was different from the uncertain quiet after Trevor's speech. This was the silence of a room full of business professionals processing information that fundamentally changed their understanding of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she concluded, "I present to you not someone who has benefited from insider dealing, but someone who has consistently demonstrated the kind of professional excellence that our business community should be celebrating. It is my honor to announce that Ms. Rodriguez has accepted a full partnership position at Meridian Industries, where she will be leading our expansion into the emerging market sector." The applause that erupted was immediate and genuine, the kind of recognition that came from a room full of business professionals who had just witnessed a masterclass in both business development and strategic presentation. But as I stood to acknowledge the ovation, my eyes found Trevor's table, where my brother sat frozen, staring at the screen that still displayed the analysis of his missed opportunities. For the first time in our lives, everyone in the room could see exactly who had been underestimating whom. The applause continued as I made my way to the stage, but I could feel the shift in the room's energy. What had started as polite recognition was transforming into something more electric. The atmosphere that comes when an audience realizes they're witnessing a genuine power shift in real time. Mrs. Pemberton handed me the microphone with a subtle nod of encouragement, then stepped aside to give me the spotlight. For a moment, I stood in the bright stage lights looking out at 500 faces, including my brother's pale, stricken expression 3 tables away. This was it, the moment when I either claimed the success that had been built around me or let Trevor's accusations define the narrative. "Thank you all for that warm welcome," I began, surprised by how steady my voice sounded through the sound system. "Mrs. Pemberton has done an excellent job presenting the facts about my business development, but I think there's a more personal story that needs to be told here tonight." I clicked the remote she had handed me, and a new slide appeared on the screen behind me. It was a simple photo, me at age 12, standing next to a lemonade stand I'd set up in our front yard, grinning with the kind of confidence that only comes before the world teaches you to doubt yourself.
I've been an entrepreneur since I was 12 years old. Lemonade stands, garage sale organization, pet sitting services. I've always been someone who saw opportunities and figured out how to turn them into something valuable. But somewhere along the way, I started listening to people who told me that what I was doing wasn't real business. I clicked to the next slide, a photo of my first catering event, a small birthday party where I'd prepared food for 30 people in my apartment kitchen and transported it in borrowed serving dishes. 2 years ago, I decided to stop listening to those voices and start building something real. Not because someone handed me opportunities, but because I had something to offer that people needed. The question tonight isn't whether I used connections to get started. Of course I did. Every successful person in this room has used connections to create opportunities. A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. These were all networked professionals who understood that business development always involved relationship building. The question is what you do with those opportunities once you get them. Do you deliver value? Do you build trust? Do you create something sustainable that benefits everyone involved? I clicked to a new slide showing client satisfaction statistics, contract renewal rates, and revenue growth patterns. But these weren't the sanitized corporate metrics Mrs. Pemberton had shown earlier. These were personal testimonials with client names and specific examples of problems I'd solved and events I'd salvaged. Every number on this screen represents a client who chose to work with me again, a referral they gave to someone else, or a problem they trusted me to solve. You can't fake these kinds of relationships. You can't maintain a 95% client retention rate through insider dealing. You earn it through showing up, delivering results, and treating people's important events like they matter as much to you as they do to them. I paused, letting my eyes find Trevor's table. He was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not dismissal or patronizing amusement, but something that looked almost like fear. My brother suggested that I've been playing pretend businesswoman with my little craft hobby, but I want to share something with you about what real business looks like when you're building it from the ground up. The next slide showed my work schedule from the previous month. 18-hour days, weekend vendor meetings, 3 a.m. emergency calls from panicked brides, budget spreadsheets calculated down to the penny. It was the unglamorous reality of small business ownership that no amount of insider access could make easier. This is what earning success actually looks like. It's not about having connections. It's about proving every single day that your connections were right to believe in you. It's about turning a $3,200 wedding into a portfolio worth $340,000 through competence, reliability, and the kind of attention to detail that makes clients become advocates. I clicked to a slide that showed the expansion of my business over 2 years. Not just revenue growth, but the increasing complexity and sophistication of the events I was managing. Corporate product launches, charity galas, multi-day corporate retreats. The visual progression made it clear this wasn't someone coasting on family connections, but someone who had systematically developed expertise and capabilities. But here's what I find most interesting about tonight's accusations. The suggestion that using family connections is somehow unethical or inappropriate. The next slide showed a detailed analysis that I knew would be devastating. It was Trevor's own career development, mapped out with the same precision that had been applied to mine. Every promotion, every major client, every significant opportunity, with clear documentation of the family connections, personal relationships, and informal networking that had made each advancement possible. Trevor, you got your internship at Clearwater Capital because Dad's college roommate was a senior partner there. Your first major client was Mom's boss at the accounting firm. Your promotion to senior advisor came after you handled the portfolio for your fraternity brother who'd inherited a chain of hardware stores. The silence in the room was now complete. Even the air conditioning seemed to have quieted,
as if the building itself was holding its breath. I'm not criticizing any of that. Those connections were legitimate networking opportunities, and you turned them into genuine professional success. But the difference between us isn't that I used connections and you didn't. The difference is that you've built a career by leveraging relationships to maintain your position, while I've used mine to create something new. I clicked to a comparison slide that showed our respective approaches to business development. Trevor's pattern was consistent. Use existing relationships to secure safe, predictable opportunities within established frameworks. My pattern showed something different. Use initial connections to create entry points, then build outward through performance and innovation. The real irony in tonight's accusations is that Trevor had more opportunities than anyone to benefit from my success. Every client I've worked with was someone who needed exactly the kind of financial services that Clearwater Capital provides. Every corporate event I've managed was for a company that could have used investment advice, retirement planning, or business banking. The next slide showed the missed opportunities in stark financial terms, not just the direct commissions Trevor had failed to earn, but the potential long-term client relationships he'd overlooked. Companies that had become my regular clients while continuing to do their financial business with competitors of his firm.
Over the past 2 years, I've directly interacted with decision makers from companies that represent approximately $2.3 million in potential annual revenue for financial services firms. Not one of those interactions was facilitated by my brother. Not one of those relationships was leveraged to benefit his career or his company. I saw Trevor's supervisor making notes again, his expression grim. This wasn't just about family dynamics anymore. This was about professional competence and missed business opportunities. But the most telling aspect of this situation, I said, advancing to my final section of slides, is what it reveals about different approaches to success. The screen now showed 2 parallel timelines, Trevor's career progression and mine, but with a crucial addition. It showed every instance where Trevor had actively discouraged potential collaborations, every time he dismissed opportunities that didn't fit his narrow definition of legitimate business, every moment where his inability to see beyond traditional frameworks had cost both of us potential success. Some people build careers by protecting what they have. They see success as a finite resource that must be guarded and defended. They view other people's achievements as threats to their own position. I looked directly at Trevor as I continued. Other people build careers by creating value where none existed before. They see success as something that grows when it's shared. They view other people's achievements as opportunities for collaboration and mutual benefit. The final slide appeared, and I knew it would be the most powerful moment of the entire presentation. It was a simple calculation showing what could have been possible if Trevor had supported my business development instead of dismissing it. Not just the revenue both companies could have generated, but the expanded network, the enhanced reputation, and the market position that strategic collaboration could have created. This represents the difference between scarcity thinking and abundance thinking, between protecting existing territory and creating new opportunities, between seeing family as competition and seeing family as potential partners. I set down the remote and stepped forward, closer to the audience. Tonight, my brother accused me of using family connections inappropriately. But the truth is, I haven't used them nearly enough. I've spent 2 years trying to prove that I could succeed without his support, without his recognition, without his professional network. I've been so determined to avoid accusations of nepotism that I've built my success entirely outside the family relationships that could have benefited both of us. The room was absolutely silent now, hanging on every word. The partnership with Meridian Industries that Mrs. Pemberton announced tonight isn't the result of insider dealing. It's the result of 2 years of systematic professional development, documented performance, and demonstrated value creation. But more importantly,
It represents something that Trevor has never understood. Success doesn't diminish when it's shared. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces that were now focused on me with complete attention. So yes, I used connections to create opportunities. That's what successful people do. The difference is what I built with those opportunities and what I'm planning to build next. I gestured towards Mrs. Pemberton, who stepped forward with a final document in her hand. Which is why I'm pleased to announce that Meridian Industries will be offering preferred partnership rates to Clearwater Capital for all corporate event coordination services, providing their clients with access to our full range of services at a 15% discount from standard rates. The implication was clear to everyone in the room. Trevor's firm was being offered exactly the kind of strategic partnership that could have been developed organically if he'd recognized the value of collaboration instead of competition. The question now, I concluded, is whether some people are ready to embrace abundance thinking, or whether they'll continue to operate from a scarcity mindset that sees other people's success as a threat to their own. As I handed the microphone back to Mrs. Pemberton and walked off the stage, the applause that followed me was different from what had come before. This wasn't polite recognition or professional courtesy. This was the sound of a room full of business leaders acknowledging that they'd just witnessed someone claim their rightful place in their community. The week following the Regional Business Awards Gala passed in a whirlwind of phone calls, contract negotiations, and the kind of professional meetings I'd only dreamed of attending 6 months earlier. The response to the evening's events had been immediate and overwhelming. 3 new corporate clients reached out within 48 hours, 2 industry publications requested interviews, and the Riverside Chamber of Commerce asked me to speak at their next leadership breakfast. But the most significant change wasn't in my calendar or my bank account. It was in the way people looked at me when I walked into rooms, the way conversations shifted when I joined them, the way my opinions were suddenly given weight in discussions about business strategy and market development. I'd crossed some invisible threshold that separated the observers from the participants in the region's business community. Mrs. Pemberton had scheduled our first official partner meeting for Thursday morning in Meridian's executive conference room. As I sat in the leather chair that was now rightfully mine, looking out at the city skyline that had seemed so intimidating just a week earlier, I felt the settling sense of being exactly where I belonged. "The partnership agreement is official as of this morning," she said, sliding a bound document across the mahogany table. "Welcome to Meridian Industries, Partner Rodriguez."
The title still felt surreal, but I was getting used to the way it changed how people interacted with me. Partner Rodriguez commanded respect in ways that Jasmine from Riverside Events never had. Not because the work was different, but because the context had shifted. The same skills that had been dismissed as hobby level when applied to small weddings were now recognized as sophisticated business capabilities when applied to corporate events. "There's something else we need to discuss," Mrs. Pemberton continued. "Clearwater Capital formally accepted our partnership proposal yesterday. They're restructuring their client services division to include integrated event coordination, with Meridian as their preferred provider." I raised an eyebrow. Trevor agreed to that? Trevor didn't have much choice in the matter. His supervisor, David Chen, made the decision after reviewing the revenue projections we presented. Apparently, the analysis of missed opportunities we shared at the gala prompted some internal discussions about strategic vision and market awareness. She pulled up an email on her tablet and turned it toward me. It was from David Chen to Mrs. Pemberton, discussing the partnership terms and including a pointed paragraph about ensuring that all Clearwater advisors were properly briefed on the value of cross-industry collaboration. "Between you and me," Mrs. Pemberton said with a slight smile, "I believe Mr. Chen used our presentation as a teaching moment for his entire team. The phrase abundance versus scarcity thinking has apparently become part of their internal vocabulary." I thought about Trevor sitting through meetings where his own missed opportunities were being used as examples of poor business judgment. It should have felt like vindication, but mostly I felt tired.
Tired of the competition, tired of proving myself, tired of the family dynamics that had made this confrontation necessary in the first place. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mom. "Saw the article in the Business Journal. So proud of you, sweetheart. When can we celebrate?" Mom, who had spent years worrying about my unstable career path and asking when I was going to get a real job, the same mother who had framed Trevor's finance degree but had never quite understood what to make of my event planning business. Now she was forwarding the article to her friends and posting about her successful entrepreneur daughter on Facebook. The irony wasn't lost on me. Success hadn't changed what I did or how well I did it. It had only changed how other people perceived the value of my work. The same attention to detail that had been perfectionism when applied to small events was now strategic thinking when applied to corporate launches. The same networking skills that had been just talking to people or now relationship development and business intelligence. That afternoon, I drove back to my apartment in Riverside to pack up my home office. The partnership came with a corner office in Meridian's downtown tower, but more importantly, it came with the kind of administrative support that would let me focus on strategy and client relationships instead of filing invoices and chasing payments. As I boxed up the contracts and vendor lists that represented 2 years of building something from nothing, I found myself thinking about the conversation I'd been avoiding all week. Trevor hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't acknowledged the partnership announcement in any way. According to Natalie, he'd been working from home since the gala, claiming he needed to reassess his client development strategies. The knock on my door came just as I was taping up the last box. I wasn't surprised to see Trevor standing in the hallway, though he looked different than he had at the gala. Less polished, more uncertain. The confident older brother who'd always known his place in the family hierarchy had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely unsure of his footing. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice lacking the casual authority I'd grown up hearing. I gestured him inside, noting how his eyes took in the modest apartment that would soon be replaced by something more appropriate to my new position. We sat across from each other at the small dining table where I'd spent countless late nights working on proposals and contracts. "I owe you an apology," Trevor said after a long moment of silence. "What I did at the gala was wrong. The way I've treated your business, the way I've talked about your work, all of it was wrong." I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation and performance that had characterized so many of our interactions over the years. But what I saw was something I'd rarely seen from Trevor. Genuine remorse mixed with what looked like respect. "Why?" I asked simply. He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands folded on the table. "Because you were succeeding, and I couldn't figure out how to make that about me. Because your success made me question whether I was as good at my job as I thought I was. Because it's easier to tear someone down than to admit you might have something to learn from them." The honesty was unexpected and disarming. This wasn't the Trevor who spent our childhood making sure everyone knew he was the successful sibling. This was someone who'd been forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about himself. I talked to David Chen yesterday about the partnership opportunity, about the missed connections, about how I've been handling things. He suggested I might benefit from some perspective on collaborative business development.
I waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. "The thing is, Jazz, I was threatened by your success because I didn't understand it. What you do looks easy from the outside. Plan some parties, coordinate some vendors, make sure people have a good time. But watching that presentation last week, seeing the complexity and strategy behind what you've built," he shook his head. "I realize I never actually looked at your work as work. I saw it as something you did until you figured out what you really wanted to do with your life. And now? Now I see someone who built a business from nothing, who identified a market need and figured out how to fill it. who developed expertise in an industry I don't understand and probably couldn't succeed in. He looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen from him before. Admiration without resentment. Now I see my little sister who's better at business development than I am. The acknowledgement hit me harder than I'd expected. After years of dismissal and competition, hearing Trevor recognize my professional competence felt like closure for something I hadn't fully realized was still open. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now I try to figure out how to be a better brother and a better business partner. Natalie showed me the partnership proposal you put together for Clearwater. You could have excluded us entirely after what I did, but you didn't. You found a way to make my company part of your success, instead of making my failures part of your story." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. I spent the week putting together profiles of every client in my portfolio, highlighting potential event coordination needs and corporate celebration opportunities. I was hoping we could talk about how to make the partnership actually work. I took the folder and flipped through it, seeing the same kind of detailed analysis that Natalie had been doing secretly for months. Trevor had clearly put real effort into understanding how our businesses could complement each other, identifying specific opportunities for collaboration rather than generic promises of cooperation. "This is good work," I said, meaning it. "This is the kind of strategic thinking that could benefit both companies." "Natalie helped," he admitted. "She's been trying to teach me about abundance thinking versus scarcity mindset. Apparently, I've been operating from scarcity for most of our relationship." I thought about the years of competition, the constant need to prove who was more successful, the way family gatherings had become opportunities for subtle one-upmanship rather than genuine connection. Scarcity thinking had defined not just Trevor's approach to business, but our entire sibling dynamic. "You know what's funny?" I said, closing the folder and looking at my brother, really looking at him without the filter of old resentments and defensive reactions. "I've been doing the same thing. I've been so focused on proving that I didn't need your support that I never considered whether we could actually help each other succeed." He smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from him in years. "Maybe we could try a different approach going forward." As he got up to leave, he paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Jazz, I should have seen what you were building a long time ago. You've always been the one with the vision to see opportunities where other people just see problems. I was too busy protecting my territory to recognize that your success could expand the territory for both of us." After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment surrounded by boxes that represented the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The partnership with Meridian would change my professional life in ways I was still learning to understand. But the conversation with Trevor had changed something else, the family dynamics that had shaped both of our approaches to success and competition. The next morning, I drove to my new office at Meridian Industries for the first time as an official partner. The nameplate on my door read, "Jasmine Rodriguez, Partner, Strategic Development," and my assistant Catherine had already organized my schedule with client meetings, strategy sessions, and industry networking events that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. But watching that presentation last week, seeing the complexity and strategy behind what you've built. But as I settled into my new role, I found myself thinking about the real lesson of the past few weeks. Success isn't just about individual achievement or professional recognition. It's about understanding the difference between creating value and protecting territory, between building bridges and building walls, between seeing other people's accomplishments as threats to your own position and seeing them as opportunities for mutual growth. The phone rang, interrupting my reflection. It was Lisa Chen from Goldstream Technologies, calling to confirm our meeting about their product launch event. As I opened my calendar to coordinate the details, I realized this was what abundance thinking actually looked like in practice, a constant stream of opportunities created by treating each success as the foundation for the next collaboration rather than as a prize to be defended. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have supported you most? Have you ever watched someone dismiss your dreams while you quietly built them into reality? Tell me your story in the comments. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is prove that success grows when it's shared, and the people who don't understand that get left behind not through conflict, but through their own inability to recognize opportunity when it's right in front of them.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.